The psychedelic revolution is here. If you want to integrate your visionary experiences into your purpose, get clear on your entrepreneurial path, and help people while you do what you love, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to The Psychedelic Entrepreneur, Medicine for These Times. I'm your host, Beth Weinstein. I'm a spiritual business coach, 3-time entrepreneur, and a lifelong student of psychedelics and sacred plant medicines. You carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times. This podcast will help you to share your medicine so you can create transformation in the world. Listen in on conversations with psychedelic leaders, changemakers, and conscious entrepreneurs who are living proof that a better world is possible when you follow your heart and live in alignment with your soul. Welcome back. I'm so excited to finally have on this podcast Dr. Hannah McLane. Hey, Dr. Hannah, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Excited to be here.
I'm so used to calling you Dr. Hannah because I first came to know you through Clubhouse, and that was kind of your name. Is that
kind of stuck?
I know. I'm like,
I know people, when I went to Horizons last year, the people that knew me from Clubhouse called me that, and I was like, at least I know where you know me from, you know? It's fine. I think it's cute.
Yeah, it's like a thing. I'm like, she could just be like Madonna, where it's like Dr. Hannah. So that's what I'll be calling you.
Okay, great.
So Dr. Hannah McLane is a physician, psychoanalyst, and entrepreneur. She is the founder of SoundMind Institute, a Philadelphia and Oregon-based psychedelic facilitator training and research initiative aimed at bringing ethics, equity, and innovation to the psychedelic ecosystem. She conducts research on cognitive diversity, psychedelic science, ethics, PTSD, and emerging alternative therapies for mental health issues. She's the clinical director of the SoundMind Center, the first psychedelic therapy center in the Philadelphia region, and training director for retreat offerings in Philadelphia, Oregon, and Costa Rica. She attended McGill University and holds graduate degrees from Temple University, a master's in communication science and Spanish concentration, Brown University with a Doctor of Medicine and Contemplative Studies concentration, and Harvard School of Public Health with a master's in public health, studying global health and bioethics. Wow, Dr. Hannah, that's like pretty impressive. Brown, Harvard, Temple, studying like 5, 6, 7 different areas of health and contemplation, even Spanish. I always love to ask, like, what was your career journey? How did you get here to where you are today? And what did you back when you were studying all this, these different realms back then, did you know you were going to go into psychedelic therapy?
Yeah, great question. I think it was a roundabout way into psychedelics, even though I think now looking back, I can understand how the thread was always there. I went into... I really wanted to go into medicine after doing some traveling abroad. I was in Nepal for a little while, in Tibet, and then Cuba. And I sort of got an understanding of what having a medical degree could do. In Tibet, it was seeing kids that had, there's a whole blind school. There was a school for the blind started by a German woman, Sabriye Temberkin. And basically every kid in that school wasn't born blind, but had gone blind from various infections, and they just didn't have doctors. So that was sort of a conversation with her is what led me to thinking this could be I could help make it so this doesn't happen, because it was very preventable. And going to Cuba, I did a trip with the Cuba AIDS Project and was translating Spanish for doctors there that were learning about the approach to AIDS. HIV and AIDS in Cuba, which was, I think it was violate a lot of human rights. They basically had mandatory places they sent people that were infected, but they tracked it. So from a public health perspective, it's really interesting that they tracked every single person that got it and eradicated it pretty quickly. But we got to speak to the different people who had been in that program, and I realized like this is definitely what I want to do. So had this plan to go into medical school, and then kind of got really obsessed with the approach to the mind and psychology from reading Oliver Sacks, and for a moment thought like, oh, I'll be a speech pathologist. It's kind of this, I can just do cognition and speech. But after finishing my master's, decided I actually wanted to continue on to medical school in neurology. So that's what I did. And found myself very interested in patients that have functional illness. So what used to be called hysteria is now called conversion disorder or functional illness. And, at the time, I was very confused why neurologists weren't very interested in this particular presentation. So basically somebody would come in and say, I can't move my leg is numb, and maybe they couldn't move their leg, but if you distract them, they can. It's a very weird presentation. You do all these tests, nothing comes up. And then you learn that there's some underlying PTSD or trauma that's causing like these physical symptoms to bubble up to the surface. And I kind of got known as like the conversion disorder whisperer at the hospital, that they would just be like, give Hannah 3 hours. Like, she'll talk to this person, they'll talk to her about all their problems, and then walk out. And so I was very interested in that. And I was telling some psychiatry attendings about my interest, and they said, like, it's very interesting that you're, this is the population you're so fascinated with. You're in neurology. You're wondering if you should like leave neurology to go into psychiatry. Have you like, we know somebody you should know about. And I was like, okay, is it someone, like, can I talk to them? Can I make an appointment? And this psychiatry attending was like, how much do you know about Freud? And I was like, nothing. What? That guy, I don't want to know anything about. But he was a neurology resident, interested in hysteria, and then left neurology to invent like the field, the entire field of psychiatry. So ended up actually going into, I don't even know if I listed on my bio, but I ended up taking that perspective, doing an additional residency from neurology, doing a residency in occupational environmental medicine to really start considering mental health from a standpoint of it's something that's happening in your surroundings. Environmental medicine is all about toxins, toxins around you. And I was like, what if we could think about mental health like that we're like just in this toxic pool of sludge, and we can think about it in the same way that like it builds up in our system. How are we going to get rid of it? So started that. And at the same time started psychoanalytic training, which is a 5-year, it's actually a lifelong training, but it's a 5-year academic training, and then hours and hours and lifetimes of seeing patients to get your final stamp of approval. And it was really fascinated. So I ended up going to the SOAP conference in Pittsburgh, which was a psychedelic conference in 2018 or 19. Mm-hmm. And they were showing Rick Doblin, and it was just a friend that wanted to go. I was like, oh, fine, that sounds fine. Interesting. But ended up seeing one of these videos of someone getting treated with MDMA. And Rick Doblin was there, and I went up and talked to him. And I actually just interviewed Rick yesterday for my class, but I was reminiscing that I basically saw this video and was like, this is what I've been looking for. We have PTSD everywhere. No one knows how to treat it. This is amazing. And just beelined it to him. I was like, Rick Doblin, I'm Hannah McLane. I'm dropping everything. This is what I want to do. What do you need? And he was like, okay. I totally did. I dropped everything, bought this building in West Philly, and have really just been on that path for the last 3 years. Just really building up everything. And when I bought this building, it was $1 million building that I took out a loan for. I was like told Rick and Shannon at MAPS, I was like, I'm going to buy a building because no landlords want to let me do expanded access, like on their, in their, when you're looking at a office space to rent and you're like, well, I need an office and I also need like a locked closet that has a safe inside. And they're like, oh, no, like I need to store my, schedule 1 substances on your property. It's like impossible. So I bought my own property. But at that time, even MAPS was like, we're not even like, there's a lot of hype, but like, we don't even know if this is going to get approved. Like we haven't even gotten phase 3 data in. I was like, I don't care. I'm doing it. We're doing it. We're going for it. And it's the same thing for me with Oregon too. It's like, this is happening. It seems like to other people, it feels like a grand experiment, but it's happening and I'm in,
I'm sitting here with like my jaw dropped. I'm like, what? That is amazing. I love this story. Because, that was actually fairly recently. I remember when soap came out, it was actually right when I was starting to come out to the public because I had been on this path for so long. And I was like, why is no one talking about this? Why is this not being talked about? Why is this one area being left out? Because that's, my area of joy and expertise. But that's amazing. And Rick is such a great guy. And I actually got chills when you said, he's like, well, I don't know if this is happening, because we all remember it was just a few years ago when it was like all very uncertain. And now it's like, yeah, well, it's here. And even with Oregon seemingly like, it's like everybody's ramping up and buying property there and things are going to open. It's like, well, wait, where are we here? Like, this was just a few years ago. But I want to ask one question about when was your first psychedelic experience and what was it? And did that also shape this path that you're on? Like, were you like so taken aback by it where you're like, you know what, this needs to get to all these people with PTSD? Like, how did it affect you?
Yeah, I mean, so I would say in high school, I did psychedelics. I was this troublemaker in New Hampshire, just like everything I could get my hands on, and didn't fully appreciate the mental health benefits, right? It's like you take mushrooms, you go for a hike. It's like, that's not really what we're talking about here. And I really, after med school, after high school, I went into a very intense Buddhist phase. So I was doing like Tibetan Buddhist practices. I would do 10 or 20 days of silent meditations every year in Hudson Valley, actually, where you are at Garrison Institute, with Lama John Mokransky and Lama Willa. And also did several retreats in different countries, like in India and Brazil. And in med school, I actually got them to let me go to Nepal for a month and meditate in silence on the medicine Buddha, which like I've gone down in history of Brown as having the wackiest project that I actually got Brown to pay for. They're like, there's no way this is going to get paid for. And I was like, I'm going to write a 20-page proposal about why the medicine Buddha is relevant to medical training.
I love it.
Yeah. So there's a month of silence, like meditating on the medicine Buddha, like pouring nectar into your crown chakra and like cleansing out your body, like 11 or 12 hours every day for 30 days. So you leave very cleansed. But I think and I still identify as a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner. It's like very much, shows up in everything in my psychedelic training program, and what I think should be fundamental, like some of these skills I've learned. But I think there is a little bit of a misunderstanding in the meditation world about it being like the only way. It might have just been also the way, the group I was practicing with, but thinking that I had this perception that psychedelics were like like a lazy person's way to enlightenment. And I was doing like the hard way, even though it was the faster way than the Theravadan way, which is the Southeast Asian. You got to meditate for at least 7 lifetimes before enlightenment. Tibetan Buddhism, it's like 1 lifetime. And it's like psychedelics, it's, a week. But I think it took a while for me to understand that they have different roles. So I think it really took seeing that video of the MDMA treatment to realize like I had closed my mind to the uses of these substances. And like seeing it used in a different way and really seeing the therapeutic benefit and like pulling out the Lancet research article and being like, oh, it's 66%, like, after 3 months no longer qualify for PTSD, and 76% a year later. It's like that I was in numbers world, So I had to have those numbers, and it was through those numbers and the science actually allowed me to start going back into it. And I would say, and I'll tell you about in a second, like some of those experiences, but I would say that the one thing I do think about a lot is in Tibetan Buddhism, in like Vajrayana, Dzogchen, like the type that I was learning, they talk about it's riding the razor's edge. That if you do the 7 lifetimes version, it's safer because you're not having sex, you're not going into the world, you're not doing anything crazy, you're sleeping on a low bed, you're basically acting like a monk. Tibetan Buddhism is the stories of people like, riding across Tibet naked on a horse, like the crazy yogis. And but it's this concept of you can actually use this is the whole concept of tantric, the tantric approach, which is a very advanced approach. And you people really shouldn't be taught it until they've gone through years of preparation practices. But the concept is that you use some of these strong emotions and strong feelings to like catapult you into enlightenment. So you feel anger and you learn to like transmute it and like shift it into compassion, like, because it is energy. You're not just like calming the energy, you're actually like bringing in, actually you're pulling up some of these emotions on purpose to then drive you. And it really, to me, feels very relevant to psychedelics, in that you are riding a razor, and that's why we have to be so careful that we have good set and setting, that we have facilitators with good boundaries, and you've gone through informed consent, and that you really know what you're getting into, that you know that you could get worse before you get better, that you could get worse and just stay worse. That there's all these things that can happen and if you don't like ride this razor in the most skillful way. And I think just teaching each other how to ride that razor is really important. So I do think the way I'm approaching psychedelics comes a lot from Tibetan Buddhism and just what I was taught from teachers.
I don't know if you know this, because you would only know if you saw my Instagram, but I literally just got off a silent retreat on Monday.
Oh, nice.
Because I actually have a background in Theravada Buddhism. The group I was doing it with was Zen Buddhist, so it was a little different, but it was amazing. And it's interesting because all of us are actually on the medicine path as well. And you said a couple things, because I actually, when I first went to drink ayahuasca, which was, one of my first like very intentional psychedelic use, not just, like psilocybin with a hike or hanging with friends. I mean, I had many deep spiritual experiences with medicines at a fairly young age, but it wasn't until sitting with ayahuasca intentionally did it have this deeper, profound effect. And I remember my Buddhist teacher was like, no, like that is not allowed. This is, it's like not part of the noble path. But it's been interesting to talk to people who have taken these two different realms, or actually multiple realms, and brought it into, this kind of new modern way of like, how do we work with all these different paths to then find, even the word healing, I try to use it with a lot of reverence, like the healing of today's modern world of 2022 with people suffering. I mean, it's like everywhere, There's so much desperation for help with the mental health crisis going on, especially here in the Western world. But you did mention a couple things about, the training and the facilitators. And let's talk about this, because I know at SoundMind, you run your own facilitator training program, which there's not that many, there's a lot of integration coaching programs and similar, but to actually train facilitators and therapists, and let's hear a little bit more about it. And because I do have some questions about this. It's because it's such an interesting world that we're stepping into, where there are more and more trainings, and there's a lot of looseness around it, and a lot of many different approaches out there. But let's hear, like, how does the SoundMind Institute, what is your approach with your facilitator training?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I bought this building in West Philly that has 8 clinical rooms and 3 overnight stay apartments, and I had this big dreams of having lots of therapists in to see patients. And about 2 and maybe 3 years ago, I was posting what I was doing on different social media channels, and I got so much interest from local therapists. It's like every day I was getting someone saying like, I want to work for you. And I was thinking, how am I ever going to have the capacity to work with all these people that really want to know more, And so for me, I just thought, well, I'm not the expert on everything. I'm the expert on a few things. There's certain things that I have been doing work on, like ethics and access and inclusion, and informed consent is like a strong interest of mine that I've written about. Buddhism is a background I have. But I was well aware that like I'm not the expert in MDMA. I'm not the expert in plant medicine. So I thought about it, and I thought, I know some things, and I also know a lot of people that know the other things. And I know that there's so many therapists in West Philly that just want more. And at that time, there was really only, it was us, CIAS, and Psychedelics today had their short program, and that was it. Fluence was just getting started. So there really was just this really deep need for any information. So I set up a 10-week program. It was for therapists only. And I invited on the people I knew, Rick Doblin, Marcella, so a bunch of MAPS people. Shannon came on a couple times. Hal Roth, who is who directs the contemplative studies program at Brown, he didn't realize that he was training a bunch of like psychedelic leaders. He's like, everyone that graduated from my program is now into psychedelics. They're like at Hopkins and Harvard and me. You know, he's like, I guess I'm doing that. So he comes on and teaches Zen techniques. Michael Boehm from Penn, who does a mindfulness program. Rodney Garcia, who does plant medicine, so he's part of the Church of the Eagle and Condor, and Belinda Iracho, who is also part of that. I had them come on to talk about ceremonial techniques, and just like very successful. People loved it. The feedback I got was more, longer, forever. You know, I still am getting that. I'm finishing the 7th cohort now. People are like, we just keep going forever? Like, it's a lot of content for me to gather. And so the second class, so the first class was great. I give away a lot of scholarships. I've given away, I think, $40,000 or $50,000 in scholarships, just not even from grants we've gotten, but just discounting people or giving them free education. And I really wanted to have a broad representation of people. And I realized pretty quickly that it's hard to recruit a full range of diverse people if you require them to have a master's already, especially if you're looking to recruit BIPOC people like from West Philadelphia. Most of them don't have a master's. So I realized it was already not accessible. Unless you want like a bunch of white women in their 30s with MSWs, like you have to expand your scope of what you're who you're training. So I opened it up to anyone, and the second cohort was so amazing because I had like Black men in West Philly doing underground mushroom growing, and like, you know, triple board certified psychiatrists in the same like small groups. You know, it's so great. And people were so grateful to have this understanding that we're really creating an ecosystem. So we need to know each other, and we need to know the common language that we can speak, because we're putting together teams, not like individual. It's like, even if you're a doctor, you're going to need therapists. You're going to need music, like people that are going to do the music and music therapy or sound healing. You're going to need someone that's growing mushrooms eventually when it legalizes in your state, you know. So I think it was really fascinating. So it ended up growing from 10 weeks to 12 weeks to then 6 months. So we're finishing the 6-month cohort now, and next year is going to be 8 months. So next year we're going to be doing both ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. So basically getting people to the point that they can be practicing independently with a supervisor. We want people to know that they can't just like go off and, you know, there's still ongoing supervision that's really important. But getting the ketamine-assisted psychotherapy training, and we have an experiential track for that, and then the psilocybin-assisted therapy, the Oregon model. But I do believe that will become the model other states will adopt. So it's really interesting. And we're doing plant medicine experientials in Costa Rica, where psilocybin is not illegal. So it's very, you know, with a medical license, I'm very careful about where things happen. And just like really respecting the need to have real experiences, hands-on experiences with the medicine. And yeah, just continuing to bring on leaders in the field. We had Tom Eckert on last week. We have Rick Doblin on that I interviewed yesterday. And just really getting people a foundation in the psychedelic world. So for me, I felt like when I went to MAPS training in 2019, and I really felt like I didn't have a sense of where that fit into the bigger picture of like, did I choose this molecule? Did it choose me? Like, are there other options, you know? And I think in a lot of ways, if people get plant medicine experiences, they can bring that into, I think what we're getting known for is teaching people kind of a ceremonial approach to the medical model, or a ceremonial approach to Oregon isn't really the medical model, but it's not, sort of somewhere in between, but teaching them practices that are not cultural appropriation, but are helpful to stay grounded over time, like cleansing rituals. Like it doesn't have to look like some other culture, but you need to learn these practices if you want to stay balanced over time, in my opinion. So cleansing rituals, rituals in general, some understanding of like the spirit dimension. So even if someone is serving ketamine, if they have had ayahuasca experience or psilocybin experience, they can often bring that understanding of spirit into the ketamine or into the MDMA, which I think is really important.
Yeah. Oh, I'm like, wow, I didn't know this. And this is actually, I'm like, this is what I've been looking for. Because this has come up a lot as I've interviewed people over the years around, first of all, accessibility, not just for underserved communities, because that's a huge issue. I mean, like massive issue, but then also accessibility with the training programs that, currently the majority of them, you do have to be, or because they're so competitive, that's one thing where the demand is so high and the supply is so little that they are only choosing, licensed therapists. But what about, because this is my former partner, who's a very close friend of mine, is, an unlicensed but highly trained somatic therapist who went through a rigorous 6-year training, but is not board licensed because he chose a totally different path of modern day somatic therapy, which is not LCSW or MSW. So I was like, well, then how do you ever get into a training program? Because although you've been doing this for however 15 years and 25 years of training or whatever, but then you're not allowed in because you don't have the board certification. But then the reality is there's a lot of really amazing practitioners who maybe studied internal family systems or Hakomi or whatever it is, and who've been on this path and done a lot of their other work, like a Buddhist path, for example.
Right.
And then there's not a lot of options for them. And, I didn't even know you guys were doing this. And this is so incredible that you also do bring in these other, it's not just the whole full medical model, which I think has also been a problem where people aren't discussing the spirits, right? Because there is a truth to this. And especially, if you are working, like you just said, if someone's going to do ketamine or someone like me, my experience is really funny because I've worked with enough ayahuasca where when I do psilocybin, it just brings me in an ayahuasca state. So,
Yeah.
I've
it's
heard
that from a lot of people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's like, you need to have people who can understand what's actually happening. So it's like, it goes beyond just this kind of academic level, which I literally had a discussion yesterday about so many of these programs, which, they're all, I think everybody's doing great work, but there's a lot of it that's so mental and so head, like academic and scientific and research oriented. And I think it's great to know, but then how do we truly serve and affect change when we're bringing it into a therapeutic setting? It's like, well, it goes much deeper than that, including, cultural and accessibility, which I also want to talk about. So
I do have one thing to add about that. Just that, I think we have people that have flown over from like Hawaii, California to do our ketamine experiential because no one else will let them do these trainings, which is really interesting. And people in the same position as you're saying, like that have gone to master's programs, but just don't have the license or have been practicing for 30 years underground. And what something a lot of people don't know, and actually a lot of doctors don't know, is the person doesn't have to be licensed to sit for ketamine. Like Mindbloom can send ketamine to your house without anyone sitting. So if you have someone sitting that's gone through a 1-year training program and has like got hands-on experience and has been supervised, it's sometimes these people are a lot more talented than the therapist too, is what I'm learning, is like, you don't have to they don't have to unlearn how to not touch someone. If someone needs their hand, they can grab it. And they've, once they've learned informed consent techniques, I think a lot of these people still have their intuition that they can draw on, that I think in therapy, they kind of teach you not to go with your intuition. But yeah, I think in a lot of ways it requires teaching, having more doctors that understand this, that it actually adds to the experience pool. If you have both therapists and unlicensed people that are, we often have people sitting with each other, and that is the MAPS model, right? That you have a licensed person and can have an unlicensed person. And I do think the psilocybin model, it's like you should have more than one sitter, if you can. I think it's really good to not, especially if it's an 8-hour session. So having a diversity of backgrounds and is really important, and just recognizing that there's a lot of people that don't have the ability to have a master's,
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you're talking about this and doing this work, because I think it's it's going to come up so much more as this grows and expands. And there is, the reality is there are so many underground facilitators who have been doing it for 20 years, and it's like, how do we serve all levels of accessibility, out there? So I do want to ask about accessibility. I also want to talk about the informed consent, because this has come up obviously so much, and especially the last year and a half, with some issues that have happened, which of course we're going to see more of. But yeah, how do we, what is your opinion on creating future models to make the therapy accessible? I mean, currently, even for someone like me, it's like when I work with my therapist, it's, I don't know, I think she charges like $1,500 a session. I only work with her for somatic therapy, but when it's that, I'm like, well, I can afford that, but not everybody can. And honestly, even as someone who can afford it, I'm like, I could fly to Peru for that much, or whatever it is. But what is the conversation out there with, people, leaders like you who are doing the training and offering this, and how do we make this more accessible to underserved populations that maybe don't have $1,000 a pop, or even like a $400 a pop for Mind Bloom or whatever they're at now, 500, something like that. But yeah, is there a model?
I think it's a really important question. I don't have all the answers. I think that obsessing about insurance coverage is just one of the many things we need to think about. So I think there will be a lot of this that never is covered by insurance. And so I think some of the options are, you can do sliding scale models. So we do subsidize people who can pay less or can't pay at all, with people who have paid a little bit more than is our the margin. I think it's also about not only helping people that can't pay, but also thinking about different models of providing care. So I think group work can be really actually better for people. So what we do at SoundMind is we have a certain amount of individual sessions we need to see people for, just to make sure that nothing is going to come up that is hard to deal with in a group, but then offering them group experiences. And to me, the model is not only great because it can be more affordable, but you're also offering them some community, right? So it's like double bang for your buck, that it's cheaper and you get people you can talk to that can kind of learn to support each other. And I think one of the most healing parts of these training retreats is that people learn to sit for other people. So it's like being a witness to someone else's healing can be profoundly healing to yourself. I think that's why these community, the ceremonial model of doing psychedelics in a circle is not just like, we don't have the money to have everyone sit individual. It's because it's actually better, and you learn so much by seeing other people's process. So just thinking about, like, where are the resources going? Do we really need to have this to be like this individualized medical model, or could we get people to think outside that box? So when we're doing these ketamine trainings, a lot of therapists, it freaks them out, the idea of like, what if something comes up? I'm vulnerable in front of other people, and like, these might be my future colleagues. And every, like, without fail, after those retreats, people are like, oh my God, I loved it. It was like not at all what I thought, So I think bringing that to patients can be, like, clients that aren't necessarily looking to facilitate, can be really, really healing. And also just accessibility with, like, the type of information, the way you're setting up your office. So Belinda Aracho and I have talked a lot about, like, how would you set up an office to be welcoming to a Native American person, even if you aren't Native American, because there's so much trauma. And Aubrey Howard and I, we're working together on just creating BIPOC friendly protocols, and just like thinking about the space, the music you're playing, who's the therapist. And you don't, ideally the person will have the option of a therapist that looks like them or has their same experience. If you don't have that background, then, like, you still should offer the care, right? It's still better than nothing. And just, like, be aware that the transference or countertransference might bring that up, and maybe that can be healing, right? Somebody might be able to talk about how they feel about, you might be being the standing for the perpetrator in their mind, of like racial microaggressions or something like that. So I think really being able to like own that and be open. We're also creating a series of informational guides with guides designed by Robin Devine of Black People Trip. So she did a guide around white facilitators serving Black patients. And so we're making another guide with her about trans affirming psychedelic care and all the things you need to know. And like, is there any reason to stop hormones and things like that? So Maya Fern and I have written that, and then she's designed it out. So we're creating a whole series of like informational booklets with narratives. So people, somebody maybe in the Midwest, it's like, oh my gosh, I've never cared for someone that identifies in this way, that can read at least terminology and some basics around what to be thinking about, what the type of trauma might be, not to pigeonhole someone, but just to be open about what you don't know. Cultural humility is so important. So I think accessibility really needs to come from a lot of places, not just financial, or even just, is your information accessible? I have dyslexia and ADHD, and it's like, is the information that's telling me how to prep, is it accessible to me? Is the informed consent, like, is there a summary document that I can quickly read and not the 12-page one? So we're really thinking about all these things as like how someone goes through the process of care.
Oh, it's so great. No, this is such a good conversation. I'm so glad you're bringing that up because yeah, it goes so much more beyond just the financial, and it's like there's going to be such a need for this information, serving different populations. You mentioned something really important about the potential for actually healing in this transference process, versus like maybe just avoiding it in the first place.
And
It's
just having
yeah.
the understanding that you have, even if you don't have money, there's things that you can do to help make it accessible to other
Yeah.
people. Like,
Yeah.
I have an animator that can animate like a script that you write, so just thinking about like, what are your
Amazing.
resources and like, what can you do? Not just focusing on the money aspect, I think,
Yeah.
even though that is a really important aspect.
Beautiful. Beautiful. No, great work. And then let's talk a little bit about informed consent. It's been interesting, this world that we're in. And I literally just got off an interview where someone was interviewing me, and this came up around, like abuse that's potential or has happened. How do we heal in a place where, like, my integration and healing practices over the years have come through not just psychedelics, but also somatic therapy, where, a few years ago, it involved things like movement and touching and, working one on one, alone in a group where, like maybe there were things that maybe wouldn't be acceptable today in 2022 because of the fear of, like the issues that have come up. But, having a therapist hold me or hug me even. How does this work in the model that you're teaching, and what do people need to be aware about? Because it's kind of this fine line. It's like, do we just shut down all human interaction that involves, getting close to each other more than like 2 inches from now forward, or like what is the answer to all this, and how, what's being talked about out there in the kind of the psychedelic leadership world?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a complex question, and I think that the important part is that people are in vulnerable states in psychedelics, right? So they may not be able to make a decision around whether something feels right or not, and even in the therapy environment, I've read a lot about boundary violations within psychoanalysis, and there is a power dynamic there too. So, there is definitely a vulnerability, and like there would be less ability to walk out when something's wrong. So we have to think about all of these power dynamic states, that someone is, more vulnerable. So whether it's from a drug or from um, just the power inherent in therapist-client relationships. So for me, I have had quite a bit of healing through psychedelics, and it's been the touch aspect has been very important. And I think for me, it's there is sometimes a possibility of going into like a terror state in psychedelics, and that can happen with psilocybin. It can happen with ketamine. Less likely with MDMA because everyone's like, I love everyone, but certain psychedelics, it's more likely that you might go into like a fear response, that you're like sort of holding back from letting go into the experience. And in our ketamine assisted therapy that we do at SoundMind, we get almost always people are like, wow, you holding my hand or you holding my foot during the experience allowed me to go deeper. And I knew I could feel safe. Like I knew my body was safe so I could travel, you know? And often I can even tell if someone's breathing like fast, or you can tell if someone's starting to have some panic, and you can like kind of calm them down. So I think it's really important to just go into this conversation recognizing the importance of touch. I know there isn't a ton of research on this. I hope that there will be soon. I think there's no research either way that touch needs to happen or shouldn't happen. I think we have boundary violations that have happened in the psychedelic space and in therapy spaces. And in the therapy space, it really just became, then you just don't touch people. I think psychedelics, it's really hard to cut that out. Because of the harm that it could cause if someone doesn't have, if someone's going into panic and you can't, it's like you can't just talk to them and say like, you're okay. Sometimes you can, but sometimes they're just out and you need to hold their hand. So I think that's a really important reason that we need to keep thinking about this. So the way to approach it is, and we have a very rigorous ethics training in the SoundMind Facilitator training. And I think it was one of the first trainings of its kind. Some folks from MAPS came in to watch the training, and then I would ask all these ethical dilemmas in homework, and people would write these long paragraphs about what they thought. Like a lot of ethics is just figuring out what is, it's figuring out like what is most right, that there isn't one right answer. You can't use research. It's really about what is right and what is, not is less right to you, and really learning to have an ethical compass. So questions around like, is it ever okay to date a patient? How long after you have seen them is it okay to date them? In psychoanalysis, the answer is never, because the idea is that you might have to go back to you might be done, fully analyzed, and then have to go back to them once you realize maybe something, you get triggered and something comes up and you need them. So the psychoanalyst, you never can date a patient. There's certain bodies, like I think in like social work, it's a certain number of years, it's like 5 years or something. Cause it's, and especially it's important to think about if people live in small towns, like, is that the only, are there only 10 people in a small town in Alaska, and all of a sudden the person can't ever date anyone. So questions around that, questions around like, if you've decided, not like, if someone changes their mind in the session about what they want, are they allowed to? We use touch. I don't think you need to use that as an example, but for instance, if someone says, I don't want to talk about this trauma. I had this trauma when I was 5. I don't want to talk about it. I want to, do something else during this session. Let's talk about like my adult, my job stress. And then they get into the psychedelic state, and then they say, actually, I didn't realize how this would make me feel. I want to talk about it, Do you let them, or do you say like, no, we decided you weren't talking about it, we're not doing that? So it's hard to know. So we wrote a blog article in the BMJ Medical Ethics and talked about that, like autonomy, like respecting autonomy in altered states. And it's really about, you create hard and soft boundaries. And if it's a hard boundary, you can't change it, right? So if you decided that was a hard boundary, that like, I don't want you to hold my hand, and I don't want to talk about the trauma when I was 3, then you just don't go there. So it's really about, before you go into the session, before the person's in an altered state, really having intense conversations around informed consent, having it written down, having people understand, what may happen. So with SoundMind, we do, we basically explain, we may use touch during the session if you would like that. If not, then we won't even demonstrate it. If you would like it or would like to consider it, then we can show you what that feels like before you go into the state. So we have certain positions that we have, just from our experience that are helpful. We tell therapists if they feel uncomfortable with any of those positions, they don't even offer it. But the positions are putting their hands under the person's head from behind, putting their hand here, so on their chest, holding their hand or shoulder, and then like holding under their feet, their ankles. And so basically we'll go through that. We'll say, you can lie down now. And if the person says like, yes, I would like to try them out, you say, this is what holding your feet might feel like. This is what holding your hand might feel like. This is what putting my hand on your chest might feel like. Another option would be you put your hand down and I'll put my hand over it. if that feels more comfortable. And then this is what holding your head feels like. And then you ask them, what did each of those positions feel like? Do you think you'd want that in your psychedelic session? If someone says like, I don't want you to hold my feet, I'll say like, can you explain a little bit more about that? I've had people say like, I'm afraid my feet smell. And for me, I say like, what if I told you I don't think they smell and I also don't care? This, and they're like, okay, fine. So something like that, I want to clarify. If someone's like, I had a trauma that involved my feet, okay, so that's a hard boundary. We don't go there. So even if you say during the session, hold my feet, you say that, that was a hard boundary. We already decided, and you can use that to talk about, you can say like, what do you think holding your feet right now would feel like? What would that heal? What does it remind you of? So you can do that before and during and in the integration, explore that. And then there might be soft boundaries. Someone might say like, well, I prefer hand on my chest rather than holding my hand. But both are okay. So let's negotiate during. And we also ask the person, do you want me to ask you every time? So we've agreed head and hand are okay. Do you want me to ask you every time I do it? And if you don't answer, I won't try it. Or do you want me to just go with my intuition? And if they say go with your intuition, then we'll just do it during the session. If they want us to ask, I'll say, is it okay if I put my hand under your head? If I don't get an answer, I won't do it. So you make really clear boundaries. And also we have people practice pulling away their hand. So if I hold your hand and you don't want it, like, what does it feel like to just pull it away? Some people that have had a lot of trauma have never done that, have never just said, no, thank you. And we've had people talk about, in our training retreats, people that have had parents that are very, don't give them space, that it's been very liberating to like put out a hand, have someone hold it, and then they pull it away. And they're like, no. And they're like, okay, let me try it again. And it's still there. Like the fact that the hand is still there, even though they had refused it before, is just the most amazing realization, that it's not like if you tell your parent, no, I don't want it. And you have a parent that says, fine, now I'm hurt and acts sad. It's like, that's a trauma. So it's all these ways that we can work through our traumas and relate. And I think, for me, it's the relationship is what's so important. I consider myself a relational psychoanalyst. So it's like comes from the 80s. I think IFS was very much influenced by relational psychoanalysis. But to me, it's when we do ketamine lozenges, which I prefer a little bit more than intramuscular, which is like quick peak and then down, and you don't have quite as much space on either end to explore what's happening. Lozenges give you this like slow up, and then you're like in space or underground or wherever you go, and then you come down slowly, and you have like an hour on either side that you can kind of feel out what's going on. People will explore what the relationship is with me. One client was holding my thumb really hard, gripping it, and she said like, this reminds me of like me like holding my son holding my thumb, and it reminds me of like my mom not having a thumb for me to hold. It was like that relationship, that touch was how she explored, and had huge transformation after that session. But just having that space to notice, like, or even if someone's like, I don't like you right now. Okay, why? Like, what's happening? What's that reminding you of? It's our trauma often happens in relationships. So it has to heal in relationship, So I think one thing to add about the boundaries and the informed consent is just the concept of countertransference and really being open to talking about it with people in training. So a lot of times, I think what happens when someone boundary violates, there becomes this like finger pointing and us, them, like, I would never do that. They did that. And I think a really important part of the training is helping people see that there are like seeds in all of us that could boundary violate, right? Like find those seeds and make sure that you're bringing them out and like working through them, processing them, figuring out where they come from. That if there's parts of you that want to take credit for the medicine's work or take more credit than you deserve, I think there can be like bypassing, like I guess spiritual bypassing, when people say like, it's just the medicine, it's not me, because really it's the relationship and the medicine and it's you. It's all of those things. Mm-hmm. So I think just saying like, oh, I don't take credit, it's the medicine's work, I think can actually make this worse, because people are secretly taking credit for everything. And then they're getting this ego boost. And then over time, they kind of become a monster and they never needed to become one. But it really comes down to in like looking at your own shadows and processing them as they come up, and having colleagues that you can talk to if something comes up. There is some literature within the psychoanalytic field that looked at people who boundary violate, and almost always they fit under a narcissistic character structure. And it's partly because there's like such a deep need for admiration from these people that they will do anything anything they need to do to get more admiration and to kind of get put on a pedestal. So I think there are people that are narcissistic, and then there's also narcissistic traits that we all have, and just noticing that, like be holding your narcissistic part and being kind to it, and really not like pushing it away, because if you push it away, that's when it can take over. So stopping the finger pointing, stopping the cancel culture, and just being like open to all of these things as the training happens, so that we actually prevent it. We're working on preventing these things from happening in the future.
I'm so glad you brought that up. It's so funny. I literally was just talking to someone about this. I'm like, look, like we all have narcissistic personality to some level, but it's the awareness, right? Like doing your own inner work of, like you said, the character structure of knowing your patterning. And is it coming, it's coming from a core wounding that you're here to fulfill some deep internal need. But if you're doing your own healing work in relation with another who's able to guide you through that process, then you're not going to be projecting or transference in a session with someone who's in a vulnerable state. And that's where I was like, it's actually quite simple, but it's like getting past your own ego enough to even go in and do that work on yourself, and that's why it's funny, because it's come up so much in the psychedelic realm about narcissism. And I'm like, look, it's not just psychedelic realm, it's everywhere. But it's like the integration of this shadow piece of us and really understanding what is at the core that's functioning in all of us. Like all of us have some wounding patterns, like, pretty much every human on the planet. And it's like, this is the healing opportunity. This is the work. But, so I'm glad you mentioned that. Because it isn't just about like, oh, that guy that, has a big ego. I'm like, no, it's beyond that, What were you gonna say?
Yeah, and I think just knowing your own trauma and what that makes you do. So for me, like I had an attachment trauma as a young child. And so my intuition is going to be more often that I'm going to hold someone's hand, right? And I know that. I know I'm going to default to like, I don't want to make you feel abandoned. And other people might have like the person I was talking about earlier might have claustrophobia around, the concept of touch and boundaries, and not, they'll see someone in distress and actually think that the best thing to do is leave them. So just knowing where your intuition comes from. And I think I would just say that having your own medicine experience, I would say is the most important way to train to become a facilitator. And actually, this is the exact same thing Rick Doblin said yesterday, but just bringing up these parts of yourself that you may not have known. And for me, I was in psychoanalysis 4 times a week for 4 years, and then started doing medicine work, and like stuff came up. We thought I was done, like that you're analyzed, goodbye, and then all the stuff came up that I didn't even know was there. And my analyst, he's a 93-year-old man in Center City, Philadelphia. He's amazing. He's trained a lot of the analysts in this city too. But he was like, how did this happen? So the folks that are like purists, they're like, that can't be true. But it's true. There were parts of the affect that I couldn't access. I couldn't feel the feeling. So when I went back, and when I think of it now, it's like when I was in analysis, I'd always be picturing myself as a baby. I was like left in a room, and I would just, it was always, I was sort of looking at myself, and through psychedelics, I was able to embody myself during that trauma, like cry for hours and hours about like, I'm alone, like in my body, I could feel being alone and sad and abandoned and like not being able to breathe. And I couldn't find that in therapy, no matter how many times I like talked around it. So it's just so important.
Mind versus body, right? Yeah, no, it's just hilarious. I'm like, this is like the conversation I had an hour ago before our interview. It was like the embodiment, and that's where the deep healing is. It's like we have to feel it, and psychedelics are here to bring it
But
all
you
up.
might not even know that you're not feeling it, right? I don't think I even knew it. I thought I had felt it and that we're like done with it, but I hadn't. It was like, no. That's like at least 15 hours of crying and being in it for you to, for you to start. And actually an interesting thing is one of my first legal ayahuasca journeys that I was on, the person told me like, okay, well, we'll do this soul retrieval process. So you'll go back and find yourself, the baby version of yourself, and hold yourself. And I was like, okay. So when I was in the medicine, I was like, okay, I was told that I'm supposed to find myself and hold myself. And then I sort of got this message from somewhere that was just like, you can't hold the feeling until you feel the feeling. And the feeling has to be alone. So you need to feel being alone and not holding yourself for a while. And I was like, oh my God. So I was just like, darkness, like deep dark alone for hours, just like I can't do the holding until I feel it. And it's like, oh, every crevice of feeling that aloneness, it was like so deep. It was so dark, and it's like that you can't heal from that unless you feel it. It's like, it's a real message. You have to feel it. And part of the feeling is being alone. If you're holding yourself while you're feeling it, it's not the same thing. So I think for me, I learned so much.
Where do you think this is all going? I mean, we all know, I know it's like, everybody's like, but Oregon, including you guys setting up a center, there's synthesis, there's, the original group that pushed for the 108 law. I forgot the name of their,
Tom Eckert.
Tom's group.
Intertrek, yep.
Yeah. So there's a lot happening, but where do you think this is all going to go? Let's say in the next like 5 to 10 years, MDMA is on schedule to become legalized, or, well, I don't know if that's even the right language, right? Like, but yeah, where's the future of psychedelics and psychedelic therapy for you?
I mean, I think the question is it where I hope it goes or where I think it's going? I think I do have some concerns around where having, I don't think venture capital money in itself is bad, but I think that there can be some motives that change when there's investors behind something. And also even just noticing the size of classes of some of these trainings, like some trainings have 200 or 300 people. It's like, I'll cap at 60 or max 70. And even that might be too much. But I think if you're offering someone to meet an instructor, it's like, you should have a small enough class that they should meet the instructor. But I think when venture capital gets behind something, it's like, how many people can you fit? How much can be pre-recorded? How little can you pay the content creators? How much can you own their intellectual property forever and ever? And it's like, oh, this is not, I think a lot of these programs this isn't even what they would do. It's just, you start having this like team of venture people that are like, more extracted profit. Yeah. So that concerns me. Scale. So I would say, in the early days, for people that are starting, it's really important to just have the intention of, we're not venture backed, and I actually have not taken any investment other than a loan for the building, which makes us like very unique in that we're, one of the maybe 5 or 8 training programs out there. And just in the early days, really standing strong if you believe that something is the way it should be. So for me, I was in the medical system for so long, and people told me how long I had to see patients. It's like 45 minutes for an intake of neurology. It's like, no, I need an hour and a half for this person. They have so many problems. I should be able to say how long I'm seeing them. If I want to take a pay cut, I should be able to say that. Like, this is my choice, but they don't give you that choice. And so for me, I will never have someone telling me ever again how long I can see a patient. So we do actually 4-hour ketamine sessions. Some clinics do 2 hours. We do 4-hour. And I think just being really, if someone does take investment, just really being clear about what your needs are and not changing the structure based on that profit motive. I think that Oregon is one of the most exciting things happening, just because it's I do think it has a possibility of being accessible to facilitators, to different people from different walks of life and different identities, and a medicine that can be used, has been used ceremonially and can be used lend itself very well to that context. And especially being like mindful of those who are still using it in the ceremonial context and getting input from them and making sure that we're doing Indigenous reciprocity, but really trying to set up the infrastructure in a thoughtful way. I think that there's a really huge potential there for it to be different. People think it's funny that I'm an MD, like I'm going towards a state that doesn't require any licensing, But I think it's different. It's like I've been in this system. I got trained for 15 years. I was in training to be what I am, and so I think if I say these things, people listen because I have no ulterior motive to say that this is an interesting system that we should put our time and thoughtfulness into. Because my interest should be that I'm trying to uphold the system that crushes Oregon, and that's just not. I don't think that that's the way to go. So I think that. That being mindful of the way we're bringing in ceremony and being respectful is really important. And, I like to be careful about making big claims about what society is going to do to change, even though I hope that is what happens, is that we all think about the climate change and we start treating each other better and we start creating less toxic workplaces. There's so many things that could happen, but I think at a fundamental human level, we can all just be living a better life and just treating single people in our lives better and treating ourselves better, and just that causes a ripple effect. So that's my dream for this revolution.
Me too. Me too. Okay, so last question, because I also want to have you share a little bit more about what you have coming up and where to find you. But let's talk about your new place in Oregon. Are you going to be doing training there that's primarily only psilocybin focused? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so the Oregon training, our 8-month program is including ketamine, psilocybin, and some info on MDMA. The Oregon experiential training can be non-medicine related, like breath work. They're requiring 40 hours of experiential in-person training. So can be breath work, probably will be able to be ketamine assisted therapy. Again, the applications haven't opened yet, but they will shortly. So I think that will be accepted. And then psilocybin will be available to train people with in about a year and a half in Oregon. So it's going to be a little while. So we're designing psilocybin trainings in Costa Rica, where psilocybin is not illegal, and waiting for Oregon to be available. So we do have a partner we're working with there that will be offering psilocybin trainings once it's legal in Oregon. And we're starting to see patients in a very slow way with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy right now, because in my mind, I think there will be a lot of people that are on SSRIs or antidepressants and want to go off them in order to do psilocybin journeys, but it's hard to just go off them if they're going to cause depression. So one way to use ketamine is to treat the depression with it, so someone can go off the SSRI and then on to psilocybin. So that's one special skill that I'll be able to offer with a medical license in Oregon.
That's great. I have never even thought about that. I'm like, wait, that makes so much sense. That's a beautiful, that's something so simple, because it is a major issue to slowly come off of the SSRIs or any other, the antidepressants or
because you don't want to cause serotonin syndrome for people that don't know.
Amazing. Amazing. So then, let's hear a little bit more about, you mentioned Costa Rica and you're doing some work there. And then what do you have upcoming, and, where can people learn about the trainings or get on a wait list to find out about the Oregon trainings or the Oregon Center that's opening?
Well, so there's a couple things coming up. One is the 8-month training that starts in September, taking applications now. It's very popular, but there's definitely space. And we have a plant medicine experiential with Belinda Aracho, Rodney Garcia, and Francisca, who's a plant dieta person. So we're doing a legal plant dieta with people. That's online, and that's 8 weeks, also starting in September. Belinda is going to teach people how to play the Native American flute. And we're going to help people channel their breath work or medicine energy into their flute playing. And Rodney Garcia is going to be teaching just the concept of plant spirits and just going through different spirits and teaching about them each week. So I'm very excited about that. I kind of designed that out of what I wanted, what class I want to take.
I love it.
They're amazing people. You can find all of that at www.soundmind.center. That's like our main page, and you can find trainings. You can sign up for clinical services if you want, and you can find in the educational drop-down menu, you can find the plant medicine experiential. And then the ketamine and the psilocybin and the Costa Rica experientials we're really only offering it now to the students that have taken the 8-month class, just because there's spots are limited, and we like to work with people that we've already trained in these various modalities. But it is possible if someone has had extensive training elsewhere that we'll consider them. I do think we're going to be one of the only programs training directly with psilocybin in the next year. Yeah.
Nice. Wow. Well, we'll have all your links and ways to find you and follow Dr. Hannah on the internet. Dr. Hannah, it was so great to have you. And thank you so much for this beautiful work you're doing. This is so important. These conversations are so important for people to learn. And I highly recommend, especially if you're on this path to facilitation or underground work or psychedelic assisted coaching, whatever it is, to get some kind of training, really, to be informed and trauma informed and have these, especially around the consent, have these really solid practices under your belt so that we can really make this a safe, better practice for everybody out there. So thank you so much, Dr. Hannah.
Thank you so much.
Honor to have you here.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're feeling inspired, I'd appreciate it if you showed your love with a review. And check out my YouTube channel where you can find the video version of this podcast. You can also head to bethaweinstein.com to learn more about me and grab my free business growth trainings. Remember, you carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times.